Hello, and thank you for joining our program today. My name is Ken Joelli. I'm the University of Florida's Natural Resources Extension Agent for St. Lucie County. Some of you might be familiar with the Extension Office, and some of you we might be new to you. In St. Lucie County, we have an office at Morningside Branch Library, and we also have an office, our main office, in Fort Pierce, near the High Life Fronton. It's out by the Turnpike and Kings Highway. So some of the services that we offer, we have programs on 4-H, we've got master gardeners, and then we have master naturalists, and we have some horticulture specialists and some other experts. We also have a research lab right across the street from us where they are working on, they've got world famous scientists working on some of the biggest problems of our planet right now, citrus greening and some other issues, water quality and so forth. So what we're going to talk about today is some of the issues that we have involving invasive reptiles. Some of you may be aware of these red-headed agamas that we're seeing. Well, as part of the Florida Master Naturalist program that I teach, we teach people about the native as well as the non-native species that are found here in our community. Those red-headed agamas that we're seeing around the community, that is, they are some of the newest invasive reptiles that we see. But before we get into that, I want to go ahead and tell you a little bit about the Florida Master Naturalist program. The Florida Master Naturalist program is a UF-IFAS extension program. We have 3 core modules, and these courses are geared for adults, so it's 18 and over. And these 3 modules are 40 hours each, and we've got the coastal, the uplands, and the freshwater systems courses. In each of these courses, people learn about the plants, animals, and then the human dimensions of living in those communities, in those settings. And it's pretty interesting. We have a lot of adult learners that take these courses, and some of them come for jobs, some of them go out and work for state parks, and some of them do it because they're retired and they just want to learn more about the wonderful place they live in. We also have some core courses, some specialty courses, including the coastal shoreline course. So we have people coming from all over the state of Florida, and they come out for a specialty class to learn about coastal shoreline restoration. And then our latest course, the newest one, is working with invasive plants. And I'm really excited about that. So I'm talking about invasive animals today and non-invasive plants, but I have plenty to talk about with invasive animals. So I'm going to go ahead and transition now to our first invasive animal that we'll talk about, and that is the rock agama. And I've got a PowerPoint that I'm going to show you. And the Peters's rock agama, these are those red-headed lizards that we see around the community now, and they're fairly new. You know, they are a recent addition to the invasive species that we're finding around the community. The next slide. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to identify these Peters's rock agamas. And by the way, that's spelled correctly. There's an S with an apostrophe S. So we're going to learn how to identify these Peters's rock agamas. We're going to talk about the range of these rock agamas in Florida, some ecology and natural history about this species, impacts, and then of course what people can do. Next slide. So I'm sure that if you've been in St. Lucie County for any amount of time, you've seen these red-headed lizards. Now, we used to call these rainbow lizards, the red-headed agamas, but the technical name, the name that we're using is the Peters's rock agama. Now, we've done genetic analysis on it to determine that this is the species that we're dealing with. So you might be familiar with them because the males have that red head, and they have an indigo blue body with a ring around its tail that's red, and then the tip of its tail is indigo color. Now, when they're in their breeding season, the males will get even redder. They'll go from a dull red to a really bright red, and that's a warning sign right there that they're ready to fight for the females. And they're breeding when they're in that red coloration. So people will see them climbing up palm trees like you see in that picture here, but you'll also see them climbing up the side of buildings and pretty much in any urbanized or suburbanized area of the community. Next slide. The females are not nearly as colorful as the males. So whereas the male has that really bright red head, the females are a little bit more subdued in color. They look a little bit like those brown Cuban anoles that we see, except they're much larger. They're about 3 to 4 times the size of those Cubanoles that we see, which, by the way, those Cubanoles are not native either. And these females will have a little bit of bluish green coloration on their head, but really other than that, they really don't have much other color to it. And you'll notice in this particular photo that the female is shedding its skin. Reptiles, that's what they do. When they grow, they shed their scales and just kind of slough off the back end of the body. And the scales just kind of slough off. That dead skin just sloughs off. The next slide. This is what the juvenile looks like. So juvenile, male and female, Pteridses, rock agamas, they look fairly similar. If you'll notice, the head is much larger in comparison to the body of from the previous slide when we showed you of the females. But then also the scales on the back side of the tail and the back of the legs are a little bit more pronounced. The head has some of that coloration, that almost turquoise colored dots on the top of the head. But for the most part, they look pretty much like smaller females. And that's for both the juvenile male and the juvenile female. But as the juvenile males mature and go into their breeding cycle, that's when they start getting that red head. And when they're really ready to breed and fight off all the other males out there, then that red becomes really, really pronounced and really bright. And of course, the indigo pops up around their body also. The next slide will show you they run fast. Pteridses rock agamas are wary of people. They often flee when approached. So I've had some Florida Master Naturalist students try to trap some of these reptiles, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Taking pictures is even hard. If you get within, I would say, 5 to 6 feet of them, they're running from you. So, you know, they're extremely fast. So we've had to come up with ways using pitfall traps and some other means of trapping these agamas in order to study them. But they don't like people. They will flee from us. Next slide. So a little bit about the introduction of this species. They were introduced to our area. They were introduced to Florida in 1976, and they were introduced via the pet trade. Now, what research shows, and we've actually seen research, we've done research and looked it up, once these invasive reptiles become generally visible to the public, it's almost impossible to contain and eradicate them. So maybe if you saw 1 or 2 of them around the community and they weren't so prevalent, at that point it might be possible for us to go in there and actually eradicate these lizards and actually, you know, get rid of them all. But unfortunately, when they get to the point where they're actually known and noticeable by the general public, at that point, it's a matter of resource management. So what do? How do you manage the resource? That's what our research right now is looking into. How do you even capture these things? You know, how do you bait them? So all that is what we're discovering. What we've also learned is that these reptiles were likely introduced a few times, several times, via the pet trade. So it wasn't just one introduction where maybe 2 or 3 of these things were let go or escaped. They were introduced over and over again and eventually have a foothold in the area and have taken off. Now, I worked with some researchers at the University of Florida, some graduate and PhD students, actually, they're very talented. They did genetic analysis. They looked at the DNA of the agamas that we had captured and that they had captured and sent in. And what we had learned is that they are not closely related to the other agamas that we have that are around the world, the agama africana, and we also call those red-headed agamas and African rainbow agamas. So when I first started teaching people about these, letting people know about these agamas, we used to call them rainbow agamas. We used to call them the red-headed agamas. But what research has shown is that they are actually, the ones that we have here in St. Lucie County, are actually not closely related to these red-headed agamas and to these African rainbow agamas. They have their own separate genus and their own species, and that is the Pteridses rock agama. We have also learned that the same reptile dealer in Homestead, down in Miami-Dade, and in Palm City is responsible for multiple releases. So they had the colony spread from down in Miami-Dade, down in Homestead, and then in Martin County, I started seeing them, it became noticeable to me about 15 years ago, and there were multiple releases. Sometimes pet stores would close and they would just let them go. Sometimes people who had them as pets would release them, and they have just kind of made their way into the community. Next slide. So where are they in Florida? And my colleague, Dr. Steve Johnson, he studied some of the range maps that we have, and what we found is that they're fairly prevalent along the coast of southeast Florida from Volusia County or so south. And you see that our area, the Treasure Coast, and we're east of Lake Okeechobee, we're very heavily populated with these Peters's rock agamas. And then you also see that they're down in Miami-Dade and down in Fort Lauderdale. And also a few populations have popped up. Now, Dr. Johnson, what he did is he used EdMaps and a herpetology database and communications with some colleagues to discover what the range is here in Florida. Next slide. So what do these Peters's rock agamas, what do they eat? They're mostly carnivorous. They rely on visual, so they're stimulated visually to eat. They like to eat insects. They'll eat small birds, mammals, pretty much anything that moves that will fit in their mouth. They'll go ahead and eat it. In their native range in Africa, they are mostly insectivorous, which might be a little bit beneficial for us because they will eat potentially some insects that could be a nuisance. But they have also been observed eating in Africa small mammals, birds, small reptiles, and even some vegetation such as flowers, grasses, and fruits. But here in Florida, more study is needed. So exactly what are they doing? How are they impacting the other species in the area? More research is needed. Next slide. Regarding the reproductive season in Florida is spring and summer. So that's probably when you're going to be noticing these Peters's rock agamas. That's when they're going to be the most brightly colored. The males will be most brightly colored, and they're probably going to be the most active. The females will lay their eggs, April through August, and the clutch sizes will usually be about 7 to 9 eggs. I have had people send me pictures of eggs that have just been found on their doorstep, and they're somewhat oval shaped, not like a chicken egg, but much smaller and shaped more oval. And I suspect that that's what it is that we're finding, and they're just being found out in the open. And the females can lay clutches 2 to 3 times annually. So you can see right here that they can lay up to 27 eggs per year for one female. So, that's a lot of reproduction, and that's one of the reasons why they've been successful. Next slide. So what exactly is the ecological harm? Now, I consider invasiveness. The term invasive, basically what that means is when something is invasive, it's introduced to the state of Florida. In other words, it's not native here. It doesn't belong here. It came from somewhere else. And they reproduce on their own, of course, but they have damage. There's either an economic or environmental damage that's associated with it. What we're finding, what the research is showing, is that the ecological harm is likely insignificant because they occur mainly in suburban areas dominated by people and development. So what that basically means is that people have already disturbed the environment where they're found the most, and more than likely they're going to be in there finding a niche to live in, and that niche is probably going to be someplace, something like the Cuban anoles. The Cuban anoles, which are not native to Florida, they have a niche in our suburban and urbanized areas, and those Peters's rock agamas are just fitting into another niche that's already been invaded into by other invasive species. There is likely little competition with native species for food and space. And that's because, if you think about native species, they're going to be living mostly in natural spaces that are maintained and managed for invasives. So Brazilian pepper tree, all these invasive plants that are found in natural areas. We also have invasive animals in natural areas, and these natural areas are being managed. Your tax dollars go into the management of invasive species in natural settings. Potentially, these Petersis rock agamas could threaten imperiled butterflies, but more study is needed. And the interesting thing about butterflies is very often their caterpillars are toxic. If you look at butterflies like the Atala butterfly is deadly toxic. It lives on a plant called the Kunti plant. It's bright red, it's got little yellow dots on it, and it's a flashing warning sign. You eat me, you're gonna die. And wildlife pretty much picks up on that signal and stays away from it. So there's pretty much no threat to people. And other than the fact that if you pick up a Petersis rock agama, the potential is there for them to bite you. So the next slide. So what can you do? We always, have that question. How can we empower people to do something to help with this situation with the Petersis rock agamas, as well as some of the other invasive species that we have out there? You can report them when you see them. Now, we don't want people calling for every Cuban anole that we have out there, because we know Cuban anoles, they're pretty extensive throughout the state of Florida. We also know Brazilian pepper tree and Melaleuca. We pretty much know where that is. But with some of these invasive reptiles, like the Petersis rock agamas, they might be encroaching, they might be expanding their range in Florida and going into natural areas, or maybe even going into areas where they weren't found before in the urban and suburban areas, like Orlando and Okeechobee and places like that in the center of the state. So it's always good for people to report them when they see them. And what they can do is they can use that EdMaps. And you see that graphic right there, edmaps.org. There's actually an app for it called I've Got One, and you can download that off the internet. And if you see an invasive reptile, if it's a python, or if you see something like the Petersis rock agama, what you can do is you can log into that system, take pictures of the invasive reptile, upload it, and if you're in St. Lucie County, those reports come to me, Ren Underwood, Amanda Thompson, and some other folks here in the community, and then we just basically do a verification. We have to learn more about invasive species and how they impact the native species that we have in our community. Are these reptiles, are they eating the native birds? Well, we've seen in Africa where, yes, they are, especially the young hatchlings that are in the nests, especially if they're low to the ground or actually on the ground. These Petersis rock agamas can eat these young birds and young animals, the mammals that are out there. My next slide. The University of Florida has some wonderful resources available. Of course, our extension office, we have blogs on there. I do have a blog on agamas on our website, and it is by far the most heavily accessed blog that I've ever written. And as of today, we've had about 15,000 people access and watch that blog, view the content on it, and that's all accessible on our extension office website. We also have this electronic data information source. We call that EDIS, and we've got publications that are being published on there. And I'm working on an EDIS publication, which is, by the time this airs, it's probably going to be found on EDIS on the Petersis rock agama. So if you go to edis.ifas.ufl.edu and you put in agama, you're probably going to find our agama publication, which is hopefully going to be ready by the time this airs. We also have a team down in Fort Lauderdale called the Croc Docs. I mean, what a great name that is, the UF Croc Docs. And it's crocdoc.ifas.ufl.edu. Now, these Croc Docs, when I need help, if I have invasive reptiles and I'm not familiar with, I will contact the Croc Docs and I'll get the latest information from them. Dr. Steve Johnson up in Gainesville, he's also a wonderful resource. So UF has the Croc Docs and other resources available on invasive reptiles. And then that UF Department of Wildlife Ecology, more than likely, if you go to this website, you're going to be accessing information from Dr. Steve Johnson. His nickname is Tadpole. Tadpole is his email handle. The next slide. We also have information at the University of Florida IFAS bookstore, and we've got information on Florida's reptiles and amphibians, and this little pocket guide that is available, SP 580, and you can purchase that and you can have that as a nice pocket guide to have with you if you're going out into the field. So let's go back and end the slide presentation. So University of Florida has a lot of information out there about Petersa's rock agamas, as well as the other invasive reptiles that we're finding in our community. We also have information about the native species that we're finding here. Now, some of the stuff that I have brought with me on the desk in front of me, I have a really wonderful book that I'm going to hold up here. This is not a University of Florida book. It's called Florida's Reptiles and Amphibians. Florida's Fabulous Reptiles and Amphibians. And this book, you can buy this online. You can also purchase it at many of the bookstores in the area. But the nice thing that I like about this, and I'm going to just flip it open really fast, it's got some great pictures on the inside of this. It has a little bit of information about some of the invasives, but it mostly is it's mostly featuring information about some of the natives. And you see this one picture right here, including some of the venomous species of snakes that we have in our area. So this is my go-to book. If I'm not finding the reptile in here, then I'm going to our EDIS documents, I'm going to the University of Florida Museum of Natural History, and I'm looking for other University of Florida research-based information. But this book is pretty much the one that I go with first. Now, these reptiles are not easy to work with. I've had training, my colleagues Amanda and Ren and some of the others that I work with, we've gone through training to work with various reptiles, including pythons. And we've heard about the python issue in the Everglades. They're here, they're in St. Lucie County. We don't have many sightings of them, not nearly as many as that we're finding down in the Everglades. But every once in a while, once a year, once every 2 years, we do have somebody reporting these pythons that are found in people's backyards. If you go on TC-POM and some other local news sources, you could probably look up pythons and find some local sources of information about these pythons that have been found here. Whenever I work with these reptiles, I always think, how much damage can they do to me? How do I make myself as safe as possible? So I've got some stuff here. Whenever I go hiking, I always have my hiking stick, my nice hiking cane. And one of my students gave this to me. I actually have several of them. I love it. It's got a little strap on it. It's got a little pad on the bottom, so I'm not going to slip out there. And then it's been engraved. It's actually, my hiking sticks, I treasure them because I know my students that gave them to me worked hard on them. So the reason I like to have a hiking stick with me is to give me that extra leg so I can go out there and be stable in areas that might be a little bit muddy. But also if I see a feral hog or if I see a snake or something, I want to be able to put something between me and that animal out there. And with the walking stick like this, I can actually use this to get animals away from me or to keep them from coming at me. So it's safety right here. The other thing that I have, and at the Extension office, we have a policy at the Extension office. If people see snakes in the plant beds, they call me in and then I work with them. These are not just regular old boots. These boots are Kevlar boots. And I do work with reptiles that can sometimes be dangerous and bite, including some of the coral snakes, which are venomous, the eastern diamondback rattlesnake, and we've got another smaller pygmy rattlesnake that's venomous. And then we also have the water snakes. We've got a cottonmouth snake that could be venomous. These boots are not just regular boots. They have Kevlar in them. Like the bulletproof boots, the bulletproof vests. Well, these are pretty much made out of the same material. So I will be protected as much as possible from the kneecap down. But many of these reptiles, they still have the ability to strike high. So I just need to make sure that I'm doing my best to keep them away from vital organs. And that's why I have these. I have an S-hook, and I've used this many times. The S-hook is very helpful. I still have the price tag on it. I didn't realize it. I've used this thing for years. And basically what I do with this is I can use it to press the head of the snake down and keep it secured. I can go in there and then manage, to secure the head with my other hand. I can also use it to pick it up and control it. And then I have this device, which I need to get a new one. This has a handle on it that clasps down. So if I've got a rattlesnake or a coral snake, I can use this to go ahead and grab that snake and secure it, and then use my S-hook to pick it up. So that's pretty much what I do with that. And you might be asking, well, what do you do with it then? I usually use a bucket, and I'll put the snake in a bucket, and then I'll take it to an area where it's not going to be a problem to the gardeners that we have at the extension office. I don't come out to, I'm not animal control. I don't go out on call at people's homes and do this. But at the extension office, since we do have many gardeners that are volunteering their time to the gardens at the extension office, I will help them out by removing snakes that are a nuisance. And so I'll very often put these snakes in a bucket. But if I've got something big like a python, believe it or not, this cloth sack right here, it's even smaller than a pillowcase. There's two of them, so it's double bagged. This would be enough to secure probably an 8 to 10 foot python, a Burmese python, if I just happen to come into contact with one out in the wild, or if I have to go out on site and do a verification. So I'm trained to do this. Don't go out and tackle these things on your own. And earlier I did mention the whole thing about taking pictures. If you're taking pictures of invasives or even native, we've got alligators that could be dangerous and rattlesnakes that could be dangerous. Make sure you're safe before you take pictures of these species, because safety is first, and then take the picture. Try to get as high definition as possible. Use your function, use your fingers to expand the vision and focus. And also on your iPhone or whatever phone you're using, you can make the picture larger and zoom in and zoom out just using your fingers. So you don't necessarily have to get closer to the species in order to report them. So that's what I have to say. Those Peters's rock agamas are the latest invasive reptiles that we're seeing on the Treasure Coast. But then I've also talked about some other resources that are available, and then things like the Cuban anoles, as well as the Burmese pythons that we occasionally see popping up in the community. The Extension Office can help with all those issues. Now, thank you for joining us. I'm Ken Joelle, I'm the Natural Resources Extension Agent with UF-IFAS St. Lucie County Extension. The things that I was dealing with when I was hired on back in 1993, way, way long ago, I've been at this job for almost 30 years. The things that I was dealing with in the environment way back then are much different than the things that we're dealing with right now. Back in the early 90s, we didn't have to worry about Burmese pythons. It was a non-issue. But now it is an issue. And many of these invasive reptiles, we've got black and white tagus that are new in the community. These are another reptile. They look somewhat like a Nile monitor, which we also have those. So we have information available on all these invasive reptiles, and we can assist you. If you need to reach out to us, we have a website, but you can also reach us at the Extension Office at 772-462-1627, and give me a call and I'll do my best to help you out. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new from the University of Florida, IFAS Extension in St. Lucie County. Thank you.